Hello and welcome to the TK1 Youth Council interview with Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. I'm Carlos Miller.
And my name's Samantha Weldon.
And I'm Tati Flores.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Governor, for this interview.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm delighted to be with you today.
Delighted as well. When you spoke yesterday at the Farmhouse Cafe, a couple of questions came to mind. One of them was, after witnessing the oil boom over the year, and for better or worse, what that will bring, but it's ultimately yielded about $2 billion more for New Mexico in its budget.
That's correct.
How do you plan on spending a portion of these funds equitably across educational programs and subjects?
Well, education's been a priority, so we have been really leaning in. That's evidenced by the fact that we've done what we call a moonshot, so well more than $1.5 billion into the system itself. We continue to invest in educators. If we don't pay them respectfully, equitably, and fairly, that means that they're forced to actually do, some other effort or job. They can't afford to feed their families. So we've done that. And we're doing all the other, right? You have to do investments in the space. We have to do investments in IT and tech. We have to do more classroom investments. So my goal is to continue to do record investments in education, but also do what I call upstream. So that's prevention, home visiting, prenatal care, get involved with families, childcare, early childhood, then get into K through 12, and then make sure that we sustain our free college program. So it's going to continue to be a real cornerstone of our investments. It has to be, and a big shout out. It's time for people to be thinking about the election because there's a question on everyone's ballot about utilizing our education endowment fund called the Land Grant Permanent Fund. And we want a little more money because we only use a percentage of the interest. So I just need a little bit more money to make sure that our investments in early childhood and K through 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that fund? I'm not familiar with it.
It's really incredible. I'd love to take credit for this fund. That's what politicians do. But actually, it really shows the power of New Mexico policymakers by knowing that when you're in an energy state in particular, boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. And so if you're in the bust cycle, then there's not enough operational funds. You're constitutionally required to fund education. And so what happens is they start to cut from the very thing that should never sustain a public funding cut. So what they did is they created this endowment fund, all right, and part of those proceeds do absolutely, in large part, frankly, come from oil and gas. And it is now the largest state endowment fund by far in education. And so it's well over now, $23 billion, well over. It's growing good, leaps and bounds. But to make sure that you don't just spend it all, you use a percentage of the interest so that you identify a percent tied to interest so that the corpus of the fund stays. The whole purpose is to make sure that we always sustain educational funding. And so it's where a large part of the annual budgets come from for every single school in the state of New Mexico.
Fantastic.
Every single school in the public school system.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Next question I have is about safety nets for youth. Research has shown that after-school programs are effective at preventing violent crime and drug use among youth. What is your plan to introduce or expand after-school programs and youth safety nets across the state?
So we're doing a bunch already, but we need more. So I'm going to actually backtrack for a second. So public schools get to decide whether they offer before school programs, which are really intended to get you ready for the school day and to support families who are off to work. After school programs were intended to create an environment for students to engage in their community, to be with each other, to have a safe place to do homework, to have access to the internet. But I will say that over the last decade, at least in my view, that they've become that safety net more for adolescent-based, teenage-based sort of childcare. Parents aren't home yet. So what we're going to ask schools to do is to apply for grants that give you more innovation in that design. Instead of going into the school cafeteria, you've got a couple of educators that stay late. It's a safe place to do homework, that's good, but it isn't creating community. What I'm hearing about from teens and kids of all ages all across the state is they want other things to do. Now, I don't want to minimize getting your homework done and making sure that those academics aren't met, but every human wants a chance to learn something new or do things. So we need to actually transcend what I call that sort of safe space, child and teen care and support environments, and we need to think about it differently. So here's an example. We're building a huge teen center in Santa Fe on the south side with a gym and incredible creative workspaces like this, so that you get educational support, but you get that effort in the interests that you have. Not all sports, not all, say, we'll do creative, economic, digital media efforts. Maybe some of it's robotics and whatever it is, but to create space, because the cafeteria is wonderful if the only option was to take you home to an empty house. Not so good if you're trying to create a community of interested young people who desire to be connected. So that's what we're planning to do.
That sounds amazing. And that's all the questions I have for you today.
Thank you,
so
Carlos.
much.
You're welcome.
This morning, I saw a posting for a position within our animal control. This position is offering an hourly wage of $14.75. When large corporations that are nationwide, such as Walmart, Wendy's, Speedway within our community, are offering much higher hourly wages. What will you do in your second term as governor to help provide competitive wages to people within our community?
So it's a really tricky question, and I will tell you why. You know, we provide direct funding to local governments, but frankly, you know, they have their own taxing authorities. That's how they get sufficient funds to do all the things that we often take for granted. Fund their fire departments and their police departments, pick up trash, make sure that wastewater systems are running properly, so that, you know, we take that for granted, right? You flush a toilet and we're safe. We take that for granted. Same thing with animal control. If it's in this sort of public health, wealth, and safety, it is the job of that local government. In places in New Mexico, it's incredibly challenging, and we really haven't talked about it. It's a very important question because we have sovereign nations. They're taxed completely differently or not at all because we're on their land, and it creates a very challenging issue. So what cities and counties can do is they can raise property taxes, and they can raise gross receipts taxes. They can go to the state for raising those taxes, and when they do local sales tax, but then that prevents local businesses, particularly the small ones, from feeling like they can stay where they are and compete. And so we do this sort of, we get on a merry-go-round, and nobody knows how to get off. So the first thing we did in 2019 is we raised the minimum wage, which we hadn't done in, frankly, forever. And we raised it to $12. And even in this legislature, with this legislature, who gets wages, right? Not hourly, wages, what we do to lift people up. I couldn't get it all done, right? We had to graduate it. So it went to 10, and then it went to, 11, 11.50, and 12. And so it was a graduated effort. As we were doing that, because of COVID, there's been a whole resurgence of, don't we really need to look at what we are paying workers? And that really is the focus here, because even if you want to do that job, whether you compare it to that or the private sector, it doesn't matter. If I'm going to take that job and I can't feed my family, then I'm creating more problems than I am solving. And so we need to get off the merry-go-round. Here are a couple of ideas that I think can really do that. I mean, one is they might have to sort of reshape how they do kind of private contracts that create entrepreneurs, that do work that has been difficult in that space, where there's more flexibility to meet the salary needs. And then they need to come to the state and say, look, and we're doing it. We're raising salaries for police officers. We're raising salaries for firefighters. We need to really think about raising these local government salaries in a way in which the state is a partner. Wage growth will actually create an economic benefit, because guess what? You'll buy a house here, right? You'll live here, you'll work here, Your kids will go to school here, and eventually it all sort of catches up fairly in the way that you need it to. But this is a country, and I actually believe in capitalism. That's not the same belief that everybody has. I think that having private sector competition and innovation is good, except for this, that when you really need to focus on the well-being of workers, it is far too easy to focus on corporate profits and the bottom line. And when we do that, we create more inequities than any of us deserve. So we're going to lead by example, and you're seeing that across many states where they have all these living wage ordinances. They apply them to state government and to local government. And I think that you should expect, and maybe you could help lobby it, that those are the kinds of policies that will make a difference in the future.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Governor.
Hi.
Yesterday during your speech at the Farmhouse Cafe, you said you wouldn't allow your children nor your grandchildren to be in a parade due to gun violence. So what are you going to do to regulate these automatic weapons as well as have stronger gun laws so that these children feel safe as well as their parents feel safe allowing them to be in the parade?
Well, we've passed significant gun violence reform and gun safety laws in the state of New Mexico. And I will tell you that it's a difficult issue for policymakers, not for policy setters, but such as myself, because I have no trouble asking the legislature, but it's been hard to get them to pass some of these laws. And I think there's just a real disconnect between people's freedoms, ranching, farming, public safety, hunting, and responsible gun owners, and the recognition that we have a real gun violence issue in this country, and we frankly have it in this state. And I have long said people deserve, right? They have a constitutional right to be safe in their schools, their homes, and their communities. So we passed universal background checks. We closed the gun show loophole. We've required that in a domestic violence situation, you have to give up that firearm pending the adjudication so that we minimize risk and outcomes in high-risk situations. And we also have extreme risk orders now, which allows us to have schools and other officials and parents basically tell a law enforcement entity that they're concerned about someone's access to a firearm because of a mental health issue. So it allows us to temporarily take possession of that firearm, again, while we look at what's really going on. So it really creates more opportunities to lessen, right, risk. Your question was very pointed about the debate in this country about assault weapons and automatic rifles, potentially. Most Americans think about it in that military-style weapon, because when you look at what's happened at schools, and it is a phenomenon that only happens in this country, and it is outrageous, and these are guns that break through huge, thick, concrete and brick walls, and it is a horrific set of circumstances. And when I was in Congress, I called for banning of those military-style weapons, and I certainly, so I'm already on the record. I think that you will see in this legislative session a robust debate, and we will be on the side of making New Mexicans safer, to think about age requirements, really defining military-grade weapons, and to be really thinking about particularly, but not just, school safety. We have to do more, and this is my view. So when you get a debate about whether there's evidence that says that having fewer guns makes any difference, and frankly there's evidence that says that concealed laws, which New Mexico has, concealed and carry, whether that makes you less safe or not, and the evidence doesn't indicate that it makes the risks of gun violence any greater, here's where I land every time. Until we've done everything humanly possible that balances the constitutional rights of owners of firearms who are responsible with the rights of people who have been harmed, murdered, and threatened, we have policy work to do in the state. And we're going to keep doing that until we create enough of those policies that increase those safety standards and reduce violence and risk everywhere.
Thank you.
You're welcome.